The blood on Delilah Sullivan's porch had been there for 3 days before anyone in Paso Robles, California dared speak to her again, and even then it was only to tell her she was no longer welcome at Sunday service. She stood in the doorway of the small wooden house on the edge of town, her hands trembling as Reverend Patterson delivered the news with eyes that would not meet hers, as if the violence her husband had inflicted on half the men in town was somehow her doing, as if she had held the whiskey bottle to his lips or placed the rage in his fists herself. It was June of 1878, and the summer heat pressed down on the dusty California town like a heavy blanket. Delilah was 24 years old, and she had been married to Thomas Sullivan for 6 years, every one of them a small eternity of fear and shame. Thomas had come to Paso Robles with charm in his smile and cruelty in his heart, and by the time anyone realized what he truly was, Delilah wore his ring and bore his name. 3 days ago, Thomas had started a fight in the saloon that left 2 men with broken bones and one barely clinging to life. Then he had stumbled home, passed out on their porch, and choked on his own vomit before the sun rose. The town decided that Delilah must have known what kind of man he was, that she must have encouraged him somehow, or at least done nothing to stop him. The logic made no sense, but grief and anger rarely did. They needed someone to blame, and Thomas was already dead. She learned quickly what it meant to be invisible. Shopkeepers turned their backs when she entered. Women pulled their children close and hurried past. Even the men who had once tipped their hats now looked through her as if she were made of glass. Delilah had nowhere to go and no family to return to. Her parents had died of fever when she was 17, and Thomas had been her only option in a world that offered women precious few of those. She was sweeping the porch a week after Thomas died when the cowboy rode up. He sat tall on a bay gelding, dust covering his dark clothes and the wide brim of his hat, shading his face from the merciless sun. For a moment, Delilah thought he might ride past, but instead he stopped, dismounted, and removed his hat to reveal brown hair and eyes the color of strong coffee. "Madam," he said, his voice low and respectful, "I am looking for work and heard there might be ranches hiring in the area. Could you direct me?" Delilah stared at him, shocked that anyone would speak to her directly. "The Harrison Ranch is 2 miles north," she managed. "They lost some hands last month." He nodded his thanks but did not immediately move to leave. His eyes took in the state of her porch, the peeling paint on the house, the garden that had gone to weeds. "Forgive me for asking, but you need any work done around here? I am handy with repairs, and I could use a meal if you have one to spare." "I do not have money to pay you," Delilah said quietly. "I did not ask for money. I asked if you needed help." Something in his directness made her throat tighten. It had been so long since anyone had offered her kindness without conditions attached. "Why would you help me?" The cowboy glanced down the empty street, and Delilah followed his gaze. She knew what he must see, the way curtains twitched in windows, the way people deliberately chose paths that avoided her house. When he looked back at her, understanding flickered in his expression. "Because it looks like you could use it," he said simply. "My name is Matthew Morgan, Delilah Sullivan." The name tasted bitter on her tongue now, that surname that had brought her nothing but pain. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan, if you can spare a meal, I will fix that broken step and see what else needs tending." "Deal." She should have said no. She should have known that accepting help from a stranger would only add fuel to the town's gossip. But she was so tired of being alone, so exhausted from carrying the weight of blame that did not belong to her. So instead, she nodded and invited him to work while she prepared food. Matthew was true to his word. While she cooked salt pork and beans inside, She watched through the window as he worked efficiently, replacing the broken porch step with wood he found in her small shed, then moving on to rehang a shutter that had come loose. His movements were sure and practiced, and she found herself wondering about him, this stranger who had shown her more courtesy in an hour than her entire town had in a week. When she called him inside to eat, he washed his hands at the pump and sat at her small table without presumption. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Matthew spoke. "I heard about what happened in town," he said carefully. "About your husband." Delilah set down her fork, her appetite vanishing. "Then you know why no one will speak to me. I know what people say. Does not mean I understand it. They think I should have stopped him, that I must have known what he would do." Matthew shook his head slowly. "That is not how blame works." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Delilah felt something crack open inside her chest, some dam that had been holding back weeks of pain and confusion and anger. "I tried," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I tried to keep him home that night. I hid the whiskey. I begged him not to go to town. But Thomas did what Thomas wanted, and when he got angry, I learned fast to get out of his way." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" She could have lied. She could have protected Thomas's memory the way society expected wives to do. But something about Matthew's steady gaze made her tell the truth. "Yes, often. Then the town is not just wrong, they are cruel." He leaned forward slightly, his voice intense. "You are not responsible for the choices a grown man made. You are not responsible for his violence or his drinking or his death. You understand that, right?" Delilah wanted to believe him. But 6 years of marriage to Thomas, combined with the town's judgment, had carved doubt deep into her bones. "If that is true, then why does everyone act like it is my fault?" "Because people are scared and stupid when they hurt. They want easy answers. It is easier to blame you than to admit they all saw what Thomas was and did nothing to stop him themselves." Matthew pushed his plate aside and met her eyes directly. "But easy does not mean right." She studied him, this cowboy who spoke with such certainty about things most people never questioned. "Why do you care? You do not know me." "I know what it is like to be blamed for things outside your control," he said quietly. "My father was a drunk too, mean as a snake when he had whiskey in him. When I was 16, he picked a fight with the wrong man and got himself killed. Half the town blamed my mother, said she must have driven him to drink. The other half blamed me, said I should have been man enough to stop him. What did you do? Left. Figured I could not change their minds, but I could change where I was standing." He paused. "But I learned something from watching my mother try to carry that blame. Learned that the heaviest burdens are the ones that do not belong to us in the first place." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over Thomas Sullivan to last a lifetime. "Where is your mother now?" She passed 2 years back. "Pneumonia." Matthew's expression softened with old grief. "But before she died, she made me promise something. Made me promise that if I ever saw someone carrying blame that was not theirs, I would speak up. Would tell them the truth even if no one else would. And that is what you are doing now. That is what I am doing now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Delilah realized this was the first time since Thomas died that she had felt like a person again, not just a target for the town's misplaced anger. When Matthew stood to leave, she walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said, "for the repairs. And for what you said. You are welcome to both." He settled his hat back on his head. "I will be heading to the Harrison Ranch tomorrow, but if you need anything else fixed around here, you just say so. I could not ask you to do that. You are not asking, I am offering." He mounted his horse with easy grace. "And Mrs. Sullivan, stop carrying their blame. It does not belong to you." She watched him ride away until he was just a speck on the dusty road, and for the first time in a very long time, Delilah felt something that might have been hope. Matthew got the job at the Harrison Ranch, and true to his word, he returned to Delilah's house 2 days later. This time he fixed the pump that had been sticking and replaced several boards in the fence that enclosed her small yard. She made him dinner again, and they talked more easily this time. He told her about the places he had been, the ranches he had worked, the long stretches of open country between California and Texas. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about her parents' general store, and how she had helped her mother with the books because she was good with numbers. "You could do that again," Matthew said thoughtfully. "Keep books for businesses here." Delilah shook her head. "No one in Paso Robles would hire me now." "Then maybe Paso Robles is not where you need to be." The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. She had never considered leaving, had assumed the house and the town and the weight of judgment were simply her lot in life now. But Matthew spoke about leaving the way other people spoke about crossing the street, as if it were simply a choice a person could make. Over the following weeks, Matthew became a regular presence at her house. He would stop by after his work at the ranch, sometimes to fix something, sometimes just to talk. The town noticed, of course, and their whispers grew louder. Delilah heard the rumors that she must have been unfaithful to Thomas, that she had found herself a new man before the old one was even cold in the ground. The accusations were baseless and vicious, but they stung nonetheless. One evening, Matthew arrived to find her sitting on the newly repaired porch steps, her face streaked with tears. He tied his horse and sat beside her without a word, just his solid presence in the gathering dusk. "Mrs. Henderson called me a whore today," Delilah said flatly. "In front of half the town. Said I had probably been carrying on with men behind Thomas's back, and that is why he drank." Matthew's hands clenched into fists. She had no right. She had every right. It is a free country, and apparently that means people are free to say whatever cruelty they can imagine. That is not what I meant, and you know it. Matthew turned to face her fully. "Delilah, you have got to stop letting these people define who you are. They are wrong about you. Completely, entirely wrong. Am I supposed to just not care what they say? I am saying you should care more about the truth than about their lies." His voice gentled. "I see who you are. I see someone who survived 6 years with a violent drunk and came out the other side still kind, still decent. Someone who keeps her home as best she can with no help and no money. Someone who has every reason to be bitter and broken but is neither of those things." Delilah looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that something had shifted between them over these past weeks. He was not just a kind stranger anymore. He was Matthew, with his quiet strength and his unwavering conviction that she deserved better than what life had given her. And she was not just grateful for his help, she was grateful for him. "Why do you keep coming back here?" she asked softly. "You must know what they are saying about you too now." "I come back because I want to." He held her gaze, and she saw something warm and honest in his eyes. "Because when I am with you, I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Her breath caught. "Matthew, I am still married in the eyes of the law. Thomas has not been dead 2 months. People already think the worst of me. I do not care what people think, and you should not either." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm. "I am not asking you for anything you are not ready to give. I am just telling you the truth. I care about you, Delilah, and I think maybe you care about me too." She did. God help her, she did. In the short time she had known Matthew Morgan, he had shown her what it meant to be treated with respect, to be seen as a person with worth and dignity. He had stood between her and the town's judgment without being asked, had spoken truth into her shame, had made her believe that maybe, just maybe, her life could be something other than pain and loneliness. "I do care about you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I am afraid." Of what? Of being hurt again, of trusting the wrong person, of losing whatever small piece I have managed to find. Matthew squeezed her hand gently. "I cannot promise you will never be hurt again. Life does not work that way, but I can promise I will never be the one doing the hurting. And I can promise that whatever you decide, whatever you want, I will respect that." They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, and Delilah felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She had spent so long being afraid, so long just trying to survive, that she had forgotten what it meant to actually live. Matthew was offering her a chance at something real, something good, and she found that she wanted it, wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. "I want to leave this place," she said suddenly. "I want to go somewhere no one knows Thomas Sullivan or what he did, somewhere I can just be Delilah. Then we will go. If you will have me." He turned her hand over in his, tracing the lines of her palm with his thumb. "I am not tied to this place. I can work anywhere, and I would like to work somewhere that you are if you want the same thing. People will talk no matter what we do. Let them talk. We will be gone." Delilah laughed, the sound startling her with its unfamiliarity. When had she last laughed? When had she last felt light enough to find joy in anything? "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple. Not easy, maybe, but simple." He smiled at her, and she realized how handsome he was when he smiled, how his whole face transformed with warmth. "We pack up what matters, we get on horses, and we ride toward something better. That is as complicated as it needs to be. Where would we even go? I have heard good things about the ranches up in Oregon Territory. Good land, good work, and no one who knows us or cares about our past." He paused, then added carefully, "There is a small town there, Pendleton. They have a minister who is not particular about asking too many questions. We could go there, start fresh." Delilah understood what he was offering, not just escape but a future. A life together, legal and proper, in a place where no one would judge her for Thomas's sins. It was more than she had dared to hope for, more than she had thought possible. "You would marry me?" she asked, needing to hear him say it plainly. "I would be honored to marry you," Matthew said seriously, "if you would have me. But you barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave and kind and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, it makes me want to find ways to make you smile more. I know that I would rather spend my life getting to know you better than spend another day pretending I do not feel what I feel." Delilah felt tears spill over, but these were different from the bitter tears she had cried earlier. These were tears of relief, of possibility, of something that felt dangerously close to happiness. "When would we leave?" "Whenever you are ready. Tomorrow if you want. Or we can take time to prepare, sell the house, settle affairs." "I do not want to be in this town any longer than necessary," Delilah said firmly, "and this house holds nothing but bad memories. Let the bank have it for all I care. Then we leave soon. A few days to get supplies and horses for you. That is all we need." She nodded, her mind already racing ahead to the practicalities. What would she take? What would she leave behind? The answer came quickly. She would take almost nothing. The furniture was Thomas's choosing, the decorations picked to suit his taste. The only things that mattered were her mother's Bible, a quilt her grandmother had made, and the small amount of money she had hidden in a jar beneath the floorboards, saved penny by penny from the household allowance Thomas had given her. "Matthew," she said, gripping his hand tighter, "I am not sure I know how to do this, how to be with someone who is kind. You do not need to know. You just need to trust me enough to try." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles softly. "And I will trust you to tell me if I ever do something that scares you or makes you uncomfortable. We will figure it out together." The gesture was so gentle, so full of tenderness, that Delilah felt something shift inside her, some hard shell that had formed around her heart beginning to crack open. She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, and they sat that way until full dark fell over Paso Robles. True to his word, Matthew spent the next 3 days preparing for their departure. He bought 2 good horses and saddles, packed supplies for the journey, and quietly let the Harrison ranch know he would be moving on. Delilah packed what little she wanted to keep, said goodbye to the house that had been her prison, and did not look back. They left on a Thursday morning before dawn, when the town was still sleeping and the streets were empty. Matthew helped her onto her horse, a gentle mare with kind eyes, and they rode north as the sun painted the sky pink and gold. Delilah did not cry as Paso Robles disappeared behind them. She felt nothing for the place except relief at leaving it. The journey to Oregon Territory took 3 weeks, following old trails through California and up through the mountains. They traveled at an easy pace, camping under the stars and staying at small towns along the way when they could. Matthew was patient with Delilah as she learned to ride longer distances, never pushing her beyond what she could manage. At night, he laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, respecting the boundary between them even though they both felt the pull of attraction growing stronger with each passing day. They talked while they traveled, sharing stories from their childhoods, dreams for the future, opinions on everything from the best way to cook beans to whether the coming railroad expansion would help or harm the small towns in its path. Matthew had a dry sense of humor that Delilah discovered she loved, and he seemed to delight in making her laugh, going out of his way to point out absurdities in the world around them. One evening, after they had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks, they made camp beside a stream in the mountains of Northern California. The air was cooler here, pine-scented and fresh. After dinner, Delilah walked down to the water to wash her face and hands. When she returned, she found Matthew staring into the fire with an expression she could not quite read. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling onto her bedroll. "Just wondering if I am doing the right thing," he said quietly. "Taking you away from everything you know. Taking me." "Matthew, I chose this. I chose to leave. I know. But what if Oregon is not what you hope? What if I am not what you hope?" Delilah moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You have already given me more than I dared to hope for. You have given me a chance to choose my own life, to be seen as something other than Thomas Sullivan's widow. Even if Oregon is terrible, even if nothing works out the way we plan, I will still be grateful for that." He turned to look at her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "I want to make you happy, Delilah. I want that more than I have wanted anything in a long time. You already do make me happy." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. It was the first time she had initiated touch between them, and she felt him go very still, as if afraid to move and break the moment. "You make me feel safe. You make me feel like I matter. You do matter. You matter to me." Then he kissed her, softly and carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Delilah did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of tenderness and respect that his kiss offered. She leaned into him, her hands finding his shoulders, and kissed him back with all the longing and hope she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he murmured. "As soon as we get to Pendleton, we will find that minister and make this legal and proper." "I know. She smiled against his cheek. "But I want you to know that in my heart, I am already yours. The ceremony will just be making official what I already feel." They held each other as the fire burned down to embers, and that night, for the first time since she was a girl, Delilah fell asleep feeling completely safe. They reached Pendleton, Oregon in early August. The town was smaller than Paso Robles but felt entirely different, full of people focused on their own lives and business rather than on gossip and judgment. Matthew found them a room at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions and accepted their story that they were engaged to be married at face value. The next morning, they found the minister Matthew had heard about, a weathered man in his 60s named Reverend Hughes who ran a small church on the edge of town. He agreed to marry them that very afternoon, requiring only that they sign the marriage register and pay a small fee. Delilah wore the best dress she had brought, a simple blue cotton that had been her Sunday dress before the town banned her from services. Matthew wore clean trousers and a white shirt, his hair still damp from washing at the pump behind the boarding house. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration. Just the two of them standing before Reverend Hughes in the empty church, speaking vows that meant everything. "I, Matthew Morgan, take you, Delilah Sullivan, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Matthew said, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to honor you, to protect you, and to stand beside you in all things. I promise to see you for who you are, not who others say you should be. I promise to love you all the days of my life." Delilah's voice shook with emotion as she repeated her own vows. "I, Delilah Sullivan, take you, Matthew Morgan, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to trust you, to support you, and to build a life with you. I promise to see you for who you are, and to love you all the days of my life." Reverend Hughes pronounced them husband and wife, and when Matthew kissed her this time, Delilah felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She was no longer Delilah Sullivan, widow of a cruel drunk, blamed for crimes she did not commit. She was Delilah Morgan, wife of a good man, standing at the beginning of a new story. They spent their wedding night in the small room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. Matthew was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure Delilah felt safe and cherished. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, Delilah realized she was crying. "Did I hurt you?" Matthew asked immediately, concern flooding his voice. "No, no, you did not hurt me at all." She wiped at her tears, trying to explain. "I just never knew it could be like this. I never knew that being with someone could feel good and safe at the same time. Thomas, he never cared if I wanted anything. It was just something he took." Matthew held her closer, his hand stroking her hair. "I am sorry you experienced that. No one should have to endure what you did. But I am not with him anymore. I am with you, and that makes all the difference." They stayed in Pendleton for 2 weeks while Matthew searched for work. He found a position at a large ranch about 10 miles outside of town, owned by a man named Carson, who was impressed by Matthew's experience and willingness to work hard. The pay was good, and Carson mentioned that there was a small house on the property that had been used by a previous foreman, currently sitting empty. "Would you be interested in living there?" Carson asked. "It needs some work, but it is sound. If you want it, I will take a bit off your wages each month until we call it even for rent." Matthew looked at Delilah, who had accompanied him to the ranch. She nodded eagerly. The house was small but charming, with 2 rooms and a porch that faced east toward the mountains. It needed paint and repairs, but after everything they had been through, the idea of having their own home felt like a dream. "We will take it," Matthew said. They moved into the house the following week and spent their first month there, making it truly theirs. Matthew fixed the roof and replaced broken windows while Delilah scrubbed and cleaned and sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town. She planted a small garden near the house, coaxing tomatoes and beans and squash from the rich Oregon soil. In the evenings, after Matthew finished his work at the ranch, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Delilah found work too, keeping books for several businesses in Pendleton. Word spread that she was good with numbers and honest in her dealings, and soon she had more work than she could handle. The money she earned, combined with Matthew's wages, was enough for them to save a little each month, building toward a future that felt secure and full of possibility. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, Delilah realized she was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way she had not thought possible. She laughed often, smiled easily, and no longer flinched when Matthew reached for her. She learned what it meant to be in a partnership built on respect and trust, where decisions were made together and conflicts were resolved through conversation rather than violence. In December, during a cold snap that brought snow to the ranch, Delilah realized she had not bled in 2 months. She waited another week to be sure, then told Matthew one evening as they sat by the fire. "I am with child," she said simply. Matthew's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you happy about it? Are you well?" "I am both happy and well," she assured him. "A little sick in the mornings, but Mrs. Chen says that is normal. We are going to be parents." Matthew said it with such wonder, as if he could barely believe his good fortune. "You are going to be a mother." Delilah placed a hand on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing inside her. This child would be born into love, would know only kindness and safety. The contrast to what her own life had been could not have been sharper. "And you are going to be a father. I hope I will be good at it. You will be wonderful at it. You are wonderful at everything that matters." The winter passed with Delilah's belly growing steadily larger. Matthew hovered protectively, insisting she not work too hard, bringing her treats from town, rubbing her aching back in the evenings. The women in Pendleton, once they learned of her pregnancy, welcomed her into their circles, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Delilah felt embraced by the community in a way she never had in Paso Robles. In late May of 1879, after a labor that lasted through the night and into the following day, Delilah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Michael Morgan, and from the moment Matthew held his son for the first time, Delilah knew that her husband's heart had expanded to make room for this new love. "He is perfect," Matthew whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "You are perfect." Delilah, exhausted but exhilarated, smiled at her 2 men. "We made him together, out of love and hope and the belief that we deserved something good." The first year of James's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Matthew proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with a crying baby so Delilah could rest, making silly faces to coax out smiles. Delilah discovered that she loved being a mother, loved watching this tiny person grow and change and become himself. On their first wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal. "For writing down your thoughts," he explained, "or keeping track of James's milestones, or whatever you want. I just thought you might like it." Delilah opened the journal, running her fingers over the blank pages. On the first page, Matthew had written in his careful hand, "For Delilah Morgan, the strongest and bravest woman I know. May this book hold all the joy you deserve." She burst into tears, which had become somewhat common since having the baby, but these were good tears, grateful tears. "I love you," she said fiercely. "I love you so much, Matthew Morgan. I love you too." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter cowboy with nothing but a horse and some opinions about blame. Best decision I ever made." As James grew from a baby into a toddler, Delilah sometimes thought about Paso Robles and the people who had judged her so harshly. She wondered if they ever regretted their cruelty, if they ever realized how wrong they had been. But mostly, she did not think about them at all. That part of her life felt distant, like something that had happened to a different person. When James was 3 years old, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1882, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Margaret Rose. James was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to help with everything from diaper changes to feeding time. Matthew joked that they had successfully created the world's youngest nursemaid. The ranch prospered, and so did the Morgan family. Matthew was promoted to foreman, with a raise in pay that allowed them to buy the house from Carson rather than renting it. Delilah continued her bookkeeping work, juggling the demands of 2 children and her business clients with the help of Mrs. Chen, who had become a dear friend and unofficial grandmother to James and Margaret. Years passed in the rhythm of ranch life and family life, seasons turning and children growing. James started school in Pendleton, proving to be a quick learner with his mother's head for numbers. Margaret was bold and fearless, following her father around the ranch and declaring that she wanted to be a cowboy when she grew up. One evening in the fall of 1885, when James was 6 and Margaret was 3, the family sat together on their porch watching the sunset. James was reading aloud from a primer, Margaret was playing with a wooden horse Matthew had carved for her, and Delilah was mending one of Matthew's shirts. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in its domesticity. But as Delilah looked at her family, at this life they had built together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about the woman she had been 7 years ago, alone and blamed and hopeless in Paso Robles. She thought about the cowboy who had stopped to offer help, who had spoken truth into her shame, who had shown her that blame only works when you carry it yourself. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing her expression. "Just how lucky I am, how lucky we are. Not luck, choice." Matthew reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm the way he had on that porch in California all those years ago. "You chose to trust me. I chose to love you. We chose this life together." "Best choice I ever made," Delilah said again, the words as true now as they had been on their first anniversary. "Mine too." James looked up from his book. "Papa, why does Mama say that is the best choice she ever made? What choice?" Matthew and Delilah exchanged a glance, a whole conversation happening in that look. They had not told the children about Thomas, about Paso Robles, about the pain that had preceded their happiness. The children knew only love and safety, which was exactly what their parents wanted. "The choice to marry me," Matthew said simply. "Your mama is saying she is glad she married me." "Oh," James considered this. "I am glad she married you too, otherwise we would not exist." "That is very true," Delilah agreed, hiding a smile. Margaret abandoned her toy and climbed into Matthew's lap. "Tell us a story, Papa." "What kind of story?" "A story about how you and Mama met." Matthew looked at Delilah again, asking permission. She nodded slightly. Their children deserved to know some version of their parents' story, even if the full truth would wait until they were older. "Well," Matthew began, "once upon a time, I was a traveling cowboy looking for work. I came to a town in California where I met a woman who needed help fixing her porch." "That was Mama?" James asked. "That was Mama. And even though the town was not very nice to her, even though people said unkind things, I could see that she was brave and good and strong. So I fixed her porch, and then I fixed other things, and we became friends. And then you fell in love." Margaret asked, her voice dreamy. "And then we fell in love," Matthew confirmed. "And I told your mama something important, something I want you both to remember." "What did you tell her?" James was listening intently now. Matthew looked at each of his children, then at his wife. "I told her that when people say mean things or blame you for things that are not your fault, you do not have to carry that blame. You can choose to put it down and walk away. You can choose to believe the truth about yourself instead of believing the lies other people tell." "That is a good lesson," James said seriously. "It is the best lesson," Delilah added. "And your papa taught it to me when I needed it most." They sat together as the stars began to appear, parents and children, talking and laughing and simply being together. Later, after the children were in bed, Matthew and Delilah lay in their own bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "You ever regret it?" Matthew asked quietly. "Leaving everything behind to take a chance on me? Not for a single moment." Delilah tilted her head to look at him. "You saved me, Matthew, not just from Paso Robles, but from believing that I deserved what happened to me. You taught me that blame only works when it is true, and that I was not to blame for Thomas's choices. You saved yourself. I just pointed out what you already knew deep down. Then we saved each other." She kissed him softly. "And we built something beautiful in the saving." Matthew pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "I love you, Delilah Morgan. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Matthew Morgan, forever and always." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the midst of pain and chosen to create joy instead. Outside, the Oregon wind whispered through the pine trees, carrying away the last traces of old sorrows and leaving only the promise of tomorrow. The years continued to unfold in blessings. James grew into a thoughtful young man who helped his father on the ranch and read everything he could get his hands on. Margaret became exactly the fearless cowgirl she had always wanted to be, able to ride and rope as well as any of the ranch hands by the time she was 12. In 1890, Delilah gave birth to another son, Thomas Matthew, named for both her first husband and her second, in an act of forgiveness and remembrance that Matthew insisted she did not owe, but that felt right to her somehow. Little Thomas, as they called him, was a quiet child who loved animals and spent hours watching birds and tracking deer through the woods. The Morgan family was complete, full of love and laughter, and the occasional argument that got resolved with conversation and compromise, rather than violence and fear. Delilah's bookkeeping business grew until she was managing accounts for nearly every business in Pendleton. She hired 2 assistants to help with the work, young women from town who were good with numbers and eager to learn a trade. Matthew became one of the most respected ranchers in the region, known for his fair dealing and his skill with horses. They prospered, but they never forgot where they had come from. Every year on the anniversary of leaving Paso Robles, Matthew and Delilah would sit on their porch and talk about that summer in 1878, about the choices they had made and the life those choices had created. They taught their children to stand up against injustice, to speak truth to cruelty, to understand that blame must be earned through action, not assigned through judgment. In the spring of 1895, when Delilah was 41 years old, she received a letter forwarded from Paso Robles. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had called her a whore in the street all those years ago. The letter was brief and painful in its honesty. "Dear Mrs. Sullivan," it began, using her old name, "I am writing to apologize for the terrible way I and others in Paso Robles treated you after your husband's death. My own husband has recently shown himself to be a violent drunk, and I now understand what you must have endured in your marriage. I understand, too, how wrong we were to blame you for his actions. I know this apology comes far too late, but I wanted you to know that at least one person in that town recognizes the injustice you suffered. I hope you have found peace and happiness wherever you are. Delilah read the letter twice, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Anger at how long it had taken for even one person to acknowledge the truth. Sadness for Mrs. Henderson, now experiencing what Delilah had lived through. But mostly, she felt a sense of closure, as if some old wound had finally finished healing. She showed the letter to Matthew that evening. He read it silently, then pulled her into his arms. "You want to respond?" he asked. "I think I do, not because she deserves it, but because I want to." Delilah rested her head on his shoulder. "I want to tell her that I forgive her, that I found happiness and peace. That her apology, even late, means something." "Then you should tell her that." Delilah wrote back, a gracious letter that offered forgiveness and shared, in broad strokes, the good life she had built in Oregon. She told Mrs. Henderson about Matthew, about their children, about the ranch and the business and the community that had welcomed her. She ended by encouraging Mrs. Henderson to leave her husband if she was in danger, to choose herself and her own safety over the expectations of others. She never received a reply, but that was all right. The act of writing the letter, of consciously choosing forgiveness, was enough. As the 19th century drew to a close and the new century began, the Morgan family continued to thrive. James married a schoolteacher from Pendleton and gave Matthew and Delilah their first grandchild in 1902. Margaret shocked everyone by becoming a trick rider in a traveling show, performing stunts on horseback that made her mother's heart stop and her father's chest puff with pride. Thomas studied veterinary medicine and returned to the ranch to care for the animals he loved. Through it all, Matthew and Delilah remained each other's anchor and compass. They had built a love that was tested by hardship and tempered by time, a love that grew deeper and stronger with every passing year. They aged together, their faces lined with laughter, their hands still finding each other across tables and in the dark, their hearts still quickening at a look or a touch even after decades of marriage. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was food and music and dancing, stories told and memories shared. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Matthew took Delilah's hand and led her away from the crowd, up to their favorite spot on a hill overlooking the ranch. They stood together looking out at the land they had made their own, at the house where they had raised their children, at the life they had created from hope and courage, and the belief that they deserved something good. 30 years, Matthew said softly. 30 years since a scared woman in Paso Robles took a chance on a drifter cowboy. 30 years since a kind cowboy told me that blame does not work the way the town thought it did. Delilah leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side the way she always had. 30 years of choosing each other every single day. Best 30 years of my life, mine too. Matthew turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I want you to know something, Delilah. I want you to know that meeting you, loving you, building this life with you, it is the thing I am most proud of. Not the ranch, not the respect I have earned, not anything else. You, us, this family we created, that is my legacy, and I could not be more grateful for it." Delilah felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were happy tears, the kind that came from being so full of love that it had to overflow somehow. "You gave me my life back, Matthew. You taught me that I was worth more than what one cruel man and one cruel town tried to tell me. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. I will never stop being grateful for that. You taught me what it means to be a good man, to be worthy of trust. You made me want to be better, to do better." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Delilah Morgan. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you forever." "Forever and always," she echoed, the words a promise and a prayer. They stood together on that hill as the stars came out, two people who had found each other in the wilderness of pain and made a garden of their joining. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family, the children and grandchildren who were the living proof that love could overcome blame, that kindness could heal cruelty, that hope could survive the darkest nights. And as they walked back down the hill hand in hand, Delilah thought about that terrified woman she had been in Paso Robles, standing on a blood-stained porch and accepting the blame for crimes she did not commit. She thought about the cowboy who had seen past the town's judgment to the truth beneath. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, to this moment, to this life. "That is not how blame works," Matthew had said all those years ago, and he had been right. Blame required guilt, required actual wrongdoing, required truth. And the truth was that Delilah Sullivan had been a victim, not a villain. The truth was that she had survived. The truth was that she had found love and built happiness and created a legacy that would outlast any temporary judgment. She squeezed Matthew's hand as they rejoined their family, as their grandchildren ran to hug them, and their children smiled with the contentment of people who knew they were loved. This was the truth that mattered now. Not the pain of the past, but the joy of the present. Not what had been taken, but what had been built. Not the blame that others tried to assign, but the love that they had chosen. And it was more than enough. It was everything.